Hey everybody, welcome to another video here on my YouTube channel. If you like this video, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know in the comments below what kind of videos would you like to see from me. If there's some videos missing that you'd like to see me do, let me know. My name is Mitchell Pearson, and today we're going to be taking a look at X functions, specifically the AverageX function, and this is awesome. My favorite functions in all of DAX are X functions, and specifically because you can do some really creative and solve some really interesting problems with X functions once you really understand what they do. So this video will probably be a little bit longer than some of my other videos because we're going to be diving deep into understanding why it works the way that it works and how we finally get to that final product. So let's jump right in and take a look at this. Now, specifically today, we're going to be trying to solve a very specific problem that I've seen in the past, which is we want to return our average over the last 3 months. All right, so we're looking at our data on the month level, and we want to see our average sales by the last 3 months. So what does that look like? And why doesn't it work just normally or whenever we normally do this? So if I go over here, I can show you a completed example real quick so we can kind of visually get an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. And what we have is over here, we have our month and we have our year. And then we have our total sales by month. And so what we're trying to do is we want to get a 3-month average. So if I'm looking at September of 2005, this should be the average of the month that I'm currently in, as well as the last 2 months. So that 484,000 that you see right there, that is the value that we're going for. Now, keep that in mind, keep that number in mind, keep that value in mind as we move over to our demo here and we start trying to solve this problem. So I'm going to start with just a very basic average function. In fact, I've already created that average function here. So I'll grab the average function and I'm going to pull average sales into our table. And let's go ahead and add in our total sales as well so we can get some context here. And what we see when we do this is that it's nowhere even close to what we're looking for, right? So you have 2005 July, our sales are 473,000. Our average sales are 3,200. Now, you probably understand what's going on here, but let's take this just a little bit further and show you the function. The function is going to be a very simple measure here where I'm saying return the average sales amount. All right, so return the average sales amount. And that's the first part. That's what it's doing. So for July, it's returning the average sales amount. And if you don't understand specifically what's going on here, and this is a challenge that a lot of times presents itself with averages, what's actually happening here is it's looking at all of the transactions that occurred within July and saying your average transaction within July is 3,200. That's why there's a big difference here. So if we go back over here and we grab something like our total transactions, I created this measure just so we'd be able to see this. If I drop total transactions into this table, we can start to see what's going on. And if you pull out your handy dandy calculator, you can verify that I'm correct. So what's happening here is this value that you're seeing over here on the right, this is the average of the total sales for that month divided by the total transactions for that month. So our total transaction, our average transaction within that month is actually 3,200. Now remember that this is totally working correctly. But that's not what we're trying to solve. We're trying to say, look, I'm looking at my data at the month level within the year, and I want to return the average sales over the month. So I want to return these 3 values added together divided by the months that are valid, the months that exist, which should be 3 most of the time. So that's what we're going for. This doesn't quite solve the problem. So what we need to do here is we need to essentially in DAX, and this is where I said this is going to be a little bit longer video because we're going to talk about a couple different concepts. We need to create a virtual table so that we can get the average of those months from that virtual table from the filter context, right? So for example, I want to create a virtual table in the background that looks like this whenever I'm trying to calculate the average sales here. So I create a virtual table that has that data already pre-aggregated, already pre-grouped, where I have the year, the month, and then the total sales. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this in DAX. There's a few different methods. I like, one of the simplest ways to do this, I like to use the values function. The values function to return maybe the month-year combination. But a lot of people, when I use that, don't understand it automatically. They don't it's not something that easily correlates back to a language like SQL. So I don't use it as often when I'm teaching as I might do if I'm just doing a quick demo or I'm building a solution. If I'm building my own solution, I use values, I'm done. But when I'm teaching, I like to use something like either Summarize or Summarize columns. And what Summarize does is it essentially creates a group by, where you can create this virtual table with Summarize that's going to do the group by that we want. And so that's what we're going to do here. So that we can get that average value, we're going to be using the Summarize function. So we have our transactions there. You can see the value there. We have our average sales. What's the next step? Well, let's create, if we will, a new measure. So I'm going to create a new measure here. And then I'm going to give this measure a name like average sales for 3 months. All right. And let me show you a bad calculation and something that you might try here. So let's say that we did have our average sales and we wanted to calculate that average sales right there. We want to calculate that for the last 3 months. Now remember, we know that that is actually doing the total transactions, but that's what we want to do. Well, what I could do here is I could say calculate, right? Which is essentially saying I want to evaluate this measure right here within a modified filter context. So I'm going to return the average sales for the last 3 months. Now the reason that we have to use calculate here, and this is where I'm going to kind of dive a little bit deeper and explain things a little bit deeper in detail, is because if you look at the filter context, so if I want to find out the average over the last 3 months for October here, or let's do November instead, what is the filter that's on this row, right? The filter is November of 2005. So if I want to evaluate my average sales for the last 3 months, I need to override or modify that existing filter context. And we know that the calculate function does that. So we use calculate to modify that filter context to include the last 2 months. So we're going to start right there with calculate so that we can get September, October, and November. And then I am going to come over here and we're going to use the DATESINPERIOD function. So we want to grab the last 3 months of dates, right? And to do that, I'm going to use the DATESINPERIOD function. Now, once again, as you get more acclimated and more familiar with DAX, you'll use different functions in different scenarios. You could use dates between here, but I feel like it takes up, it requires more development effort. And DATESINPERIOD is just really simple. Also, a lot of times if I'm writing something like this one right here, I would probably use a variable for pieces of this, right? So I'm not going to do it here because I don't want to get into overcomplicating things when I'm focusing on specific topics, but variables are really, really easy to do. And so right here for the start date, I would use that. I would probably put that in a variable. But what I'm going to do for the start date is I'm going to take the last date of the filter context. So if we're in November, I'm going to grab November 30th of 2005. So we're going to say last date of the current date that we're looking at. And then we're going to go back -3. So we're kind of doing this backwards. We'll go back -3 at the month level. So let's talk about what this does. Now I'm saying calculate average sales, evaluate my average sales over the last 3 months. So we're using calculate here to redefine the filter context, right? And so this right here doesn't work per se because even though the number might slightly change over here, the reason we know it's not working is because we're still doing that average sales measure, which is the average across all transactions, not across months. And that's why we're seeing 3,000, 3,200, 3,100 instead of seeing, 600,000 or whatever that average might be. So let's tackle this from a different angle. I talked about the fact that we want to create that virtual table. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit. And we're going to come back. We don't need this for quite some time. We're still going to need that expression later, but we don't need that right now. And then I'm going to get rid of all of this right here as well. And so what I want to do is I want to create an expression that returns that virtual table that we need. So for example, we're going to use Summarize here. And Summarize creates a summary. So that definition is hard to read. But essentially what Summarize does is it creates a summarized table grouped by the columns that you input, right? And so I'm going to tell it that I want to summarize the date table. And then from the date table, we want to return our calendar year. And we want to return our month. I also am going to add an aggregation here. So this is one of the things that's pretty cool is you can add in an aggregation. And remember what we want that virtual table to look like. We want it to have the year, we want it to have the month, and we want it to have the sales for that combination. So if we're looking at, I don't even remember, November, if it was 600,000, we want November 2005, 600,000. And so once we get that virtual table that has those three values, then we can average up those values across those 3 months. And that gives us exactly what we're looking for. In comes AverageX. We're going to come back to AverageX in a minute. So what we can do here is I am going to go ahead and tell it total sales. We're going to create a new value in here, which is going to be total sales, and we'll call it by month. And then we're going to take advantage of our total sales measure that we already have created right there, like so. And so I can't really hit enter here. I can't hit enter and just show you this table because this is a calculated measure. It's not a calculated table. If we really wanted to play with this, we'd go over to DAX Studio and we could display the results of this in DAX Studio. And I'll do some more videos on DAX Studio because it is fun when you're doing this kind of work here. But this is going to return that table. So if you're looking at any 3-month period here, and if I return it, it's going to fail. But let me show you something else. I'm going to just count rows so we can kind of get an idea of how many rows are showing up in this table. So this is a validation method to find out what's being returned, right? How many rows are being returned? So if I count the rows of this table right here, and we're going to add this once we're done here in just a moment, we're going to add it into our table, into our visual so we can take a look at it. So we'll just do a quick count rows. I'm going to grab our average sales, we'll drop it right here in the table, and what we should see, because of the filter context, is we see 1. So what it's doing is, if you're looking at July right here, and I'll just go ahead and grab that right there, our summary table that we're creating, our virtual table that we want to get our average from, it's only returning July of 2005, and then it's returning this value of 473,000 right here. In fact, this would be exactly what that virtual table looks like. And so because of filter context, it's limiting the date table down to just July of 2005. So when we do our summary, when we do our group by, we only see July of 2005. So what do we have to do? Well, we use calculate in order to modify that filter context so that we can see July, June, and May. Or if we're in August, we can see August, July, and June. So what we want to do is, let's just imagine we're trying to create the 3-month average for September here. I want to create, essentially, see if we can find that, a virtual table that looks exactly like this so that I can create the average for September. Make sense? Hopefully that part is clear. This is the hardest part for people to wrap their head around, is that virtual table aspect of it. So we're going to do that, and we're going to start moving towards the conclusion of this solution here. So we no longer need count rows. We use that as just a little trick here very quickly to kind of validate our code. Now we're going to do average. Now here's the thing about average. If I type in average, notice that average only accepts a single parameter as its input. And that parameter is a column name. But I just told you a moment ago, we're using Summarize, and Summarize is actually returning a table expression. In fact, we use count rows on top of it because count rows works on a table. So you know it's a table. So I cannot pass that result of Summarize into average. It doesn't work. So we're kind of forced here, if you will, to use the function AverageX. And this is where I get to tell you about my favorite functions in DAX, and we get to have a conversation about this. AverageX, notice what these X functions do. As their very first parameter, they take in a table as a parameter. So a table or a table expression. Summarize is returning a table expression. And then they perform an expression. So this is going to be AverageX. So let's do this. We're going to first and foremost pass in this table that we just created as the first parameter. We're going to type a comma here, and then we're going to say total sales by month right there. So we're going to use that value that we created inside of our virtual table right here. And this is looking pretty good. So let's talk about the semantics of X functions and how they work and how they get evaluated, because I am a visual person. So whenever I look at an X function, any X function, I consider them two separate and distinct operations. The first part of the X function is going to be the X. And the X, what it does, let's go ahead and pull back up the definition right here. What it does is it works over a table one row at a time, and it performs that expression on the table. So what we're telling it here is we want it to look at that table that got returned. So July of 2005, 630,000. And what the X function does is it looks at July of 2005 and it returns that expression for July of 2005, which is 630,000. Then it goes down to August. Then it goes down to the September. And it goes down every row that exists in that table. Now we know that we're going to be ultimately limiting this table to 3 months. So it'll go over all 3 months and it'll return the sum of cells for each month individually. That's what the X function does. Now, we're not done because all we have is a modified, if you will, all we have at this point is a modified virtual table. We've just created a virtual table from the original one, right? Because technically, I added this in our summary table. We didn't need this here. So if I wanted to, we didn't need that in our summary table because we were going to do it afterwards anyway. So just to simplify this to show you, let me go ahead and get rid of that. Our summary table now is just the date, the dates. It's just the year and the month. We're not doing any kind of expression. We just simplified this a lot. Now this cells doesn't exist anymore, so we're just going to say total cells. All right. So now what AverageX is doing is it's looking at that year-month combination, and it says, all right, July 2005, return this expression, the sum of cells for that entire month. August of 2005, return this expression, the sum of cells. September of 2005, return total cells. So now at the very end, we have a table that looks like this, that has the months and it has the total cells. Now, the X function is done. It's worked on every row in that table. It's returned an expression for every row in that table. So now the second part of this expression steps in, which is your function. So the function in this case is average. So what does average do? It says, okay, well, you have 630,000. I don't know the exact numbers here. You have 540,000 and you have another 630,000. So what is the average of that? And that's what gets returned. And your sum X works this way, concatenate X works this way, min X, max X, right? If we were using min X here, what min X would do is at the very end, we'd have a list of our year, our month, and our total cells. Min X would say, okay, now I have this table, get the minimum value from that table. Max X would get the maximum value. So the function that you use, it comes in after the X function has done all of its work and it kind of cleans things up. So this is definitely going to be two separate and distinct operations. Now, this doesn't work the way that it currently is because if I hit enter and we go look at the results over here, what you're going to notice is that the value that we see over here on the right is exactly the value that we see over here on the left. So it's not an average over the last 3 months. It's literally just an average of that month, which is awesome. It's showing us that it is working and it is grouped at the month level, unlike this average cells right here, which is by transactions. So that's awesome that it's working and we're on the right path. But we have one final piece that we need to do here, one final piece that we need to add back in, and that is simply we need to change and modify the filter context so that we're not only looking at the current month, but we can go back and look at prior months as well. So that's going to be the next step here. Let's go ahead and expand our code. And we wrote this code earlier. I didn't explain it in great detail at that time, but we can take a look at it now. So I'm going to do uncomment my code. By the way, if you want to comment code and uncomment code, this is free. This is extra, no additional cost. You can use Control plus K plus C to comment your code. And so we can type that in here. And then you can also use Control K plus U to uncomment your code. So we don't have to type everything again. We'll do that. And then that would be uncomment your code. So that's really quick. When you're testing things out and you're commenting your code, you're uncommenting code, you can just use that. I believe it's exactly the same way it was in SQL. I haven't had to write a lot of SQL in the last few years, but I'm pretty sure it was the exact same hotkey there as well. Now, we'll get rid of this guy right here. We have Summarize, perfect, got AverageX, close that up. And so we want to evaluate this expression within a modified filter context. So in comes calculate, right? So we're going to bring in the calculate function. We're going to put a comma right here. And so evaluate this expression right here within this modified filter context, which now says if I'm looking at October, get October, September, August. If I'm looking at December, get December, November, October. It's giving us those 3 months. In fact, if we wanted, we could do like a count rows on this and see what that is as well. All right, that is, I think, going to wrap it up. Let's move this little comment to the top. Clean this up a little bit here. There we go. So calculate, it looks like a lot, right? This is intimidating, this code does, but it's so simple when you break it down into smaller pieces and just understand what it's doing. There's some follow-up videos I want to do with this. I'm not guaranteeing and I'm not promising it, but there's some follow-up videos. One is Summarize and Summarize columns. You actually can't use Summarize columns here. It's recommended that you use Summarize columns where you can, but Summarize columns really struggles when you use it within a modified filter context, which is what we just did. So I had to use Summarize. So if you're a little bit more adept at DAX and you saw that, that's what's going on. So I want to do a video on that where I come back and I go into really discussing this again and talking about that. So that's one thing I would like to dive back into here. We could have used dates between instead of dates in period, but when you're looking over specific periods like months or something like that, I find dates in period to be very, very easy to work with. And like I said, we could have used values instead of Summarize as well. Now, with that being done, let's go ahead and jump back over here and take a look and see if our average is working the way that we want. And in fact, I'm going to format this real quick. And then let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look. So if we're looking at October here, it definitely looks like the numbers are getting really close to where we want them. And you'll notice that what this should be is October, that average should be the average over the last 3 months. So the question is, what is the sum of 506,000, 473,000, 513,000 divided, and then we would divide it by 3. So if we want to follow this through just with total validation here, I would pull in my handy dandy calculator real quick. Drop it right here under October. And we're going to do, actually, let's do these 3 right here. We're going to do these 3 months right here for that average. So let's see what we get. If I do 473388 plus 506191 plus 473943, enter. I can then divide that by 3, and that gives us 484,507. And if we take that value right there and we compare it with that value right there, you see that it matches, and we're exactly where we want to be here. We didn't worry about the cents, but that gets us exactly where we want to be. All right, this was a very exciting video where we got to take a look at the average function and the AverageX function, really just working with averages in DAX, which can be a little bit challenging. I've worked with many people on a one-on-one basis trying to help them solve problems, and we've had to introduce these kind of virtual tables and these X functions to do that. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button. Check out my other videos that I have on DAX. Let me know in the comments below what you're interested in, and have a good rest of your day.